Join us as we sit down with remarkable individuals from various walks of life who faced their fair share of obstacles and emerged with positivity. Each episode, you'll hear inspiring stories, actionable tips, and wisdom that can supercharge your own journey when using adversity as motivation. Let's learn together. Welcome to Lauer Power.
Welcome to another edition of Lauer Power, using adversity as motivation alongside Chad Lauer. I'm Chad Evans. Thanks so much for joining us on yet another fun, thrilling podcast. And before we get started, we want to let you know that you should subscribe. I think that's a good idea, Chad.
Yeah, we need you to subscribe. We need you to review. We need you to like. It's one of the things that we failed to ask about on our previous episodes. So we're going to sell you a little bit today in clicking that little subscribe button, especially if you're on YouTube.
Yes, we greatly appreciate that, taking the time to do all those things. Pretty good episode today. This is going to be really cool. Your cousin works for NASA?
Yeah, I'm super excited. It's another personal one, but she's so smart. Like I always have to ask her to dumb it down for me, but I think what you're going to hear today is there's some really, really cool things happening in the world. And she's from the coal region, and it's really cool for us to tell her story and all the neat things that she's doing at NASA.
So who is this person?
So my first cousin, Kelly McCarthy, Lourdes graduate. And I'm going to do her intro. I'm going to just get right into it. So she's currently working at NASA and is the current lead in the Moon Trees Education activity. They're literally sending trees to the moon, and they're allowing students in classrooms all over the country to participate and kind of learn along with them. 5 different species to the moon, and as she mentions, you'll hear a little bit, they're also working on sending some humans to Mars.
You almost sound like you know what you're talking about.
Yeah, I really had to work hard at this. So listen, Kelly McCarthy, she is an Albert Einstein Distinguished Educator by the National Science Foundation. She also participated in a PolarTREC Educator trip to Greenland, mapping the Arctic land and sea ice through 8 to 9 hours of science flights. She has collaborated with multiple scientists and currently, as I mentioned, is working at NASA. She is a former Teach for America teacher at Germantown High School. She taught physics and middle school STEM at Our Lady of Lourdes, and she's in the American Geophysical Union, and she loves physics. So as you can see, I could barely get some of that out of my mouth, but I think you're going to really, really, really enjoy her story. And before we get started, I want to talk about my cousin because if you would just talk to her in a normal conversation, you would have no idea, right?
Yeah.
She's as humble as they come. Right? She really is. She's as humble as they come, and she doesn't have to be humble. She's brilliant, and I can say that. She would never tell you that, but she is. And the leadership topic of the day, because of that, is curiosity fuels innovation. And I think this is important for multiple facets. In the business world, if we're not curious and we just don't want to learn the next thing or learn kind of how to get better, we're not really going to put our best foot forward. She's literally curious about the planet Earth and the world and sending people to outer space and physics and stuff that I can't even comprehend. But she wants to use that curiosity to find the next thing, learn the next thing, and then she shares it with middle school students because that's her passion and she wants to fuel their curiosity. So I think curiosity is one of the best traits we can have in life and especially in entrepreneurship. And we're going to learn from an educator today, and she has so much to offer, Chad.
Well, let's get to it. Let's talk to Kelly.
Our guest today is a super special guest. It's my cousin, Kelly McCarthy, and she's here to talk to us about our leadership topic, which is curiosity fuels innovation. She's one of the most curious people I know. I mean, we're like normal cousins. We don't spend every weekend together, but when we pop back and forth, we shoot a text or we have a conversation, she's always working on something amazing. She might have to dumb it down for us today, I'll be honest, because some of the things she's working on, I think for a majority of us, are really hard to comprehend. So Kelly, thanks so much for joining us today. I'm super excited to have you as a guest, and I can't wait to share with our audience some of the really cool things you've been working on.
Thanks, Chad. It's so nice to be here, and I'm honored to have been invited to join y'all for this conversation.
Great. So just to get started, I mean, you're working at NASA. And before we get into, your background and how you got there, I just want to jump right into it. So first of all, what is it like working at NASA? And can you tell the audience some of the things that you're doing right now?
Yeah. What is it like? It's honestly more than I ever could have imagined it to be. Like, I think what you said about being curious is right on. I get to be curious every single day, and I show up and I'm challenged by people who are way smarter than me, and I get to ask them questions. And it's just very exciting to be surrounded by this culture of innovation and forward thinking and inclusion. And so today, for example, one of the projects that I'm working on is our Moon Trees Education Initiative. So some of the folks listening might be familiar with NASA's Artemis program, which is the series of missions that's going to get humans back to the moon and eventually to Mars. And so aside of that just being a really cool effort and there being so many things tied to it, my office sent an education payload on the first flight of the Artemis program, which launched November of 2022, went further than any spacecraft meant for humans has ever gone. And we put a little pouch of 5 species of seeds on board that we're distributing to education organizations, libraries, museums, schools all around the country. So before I got on with y'all, I was on a meeting just to kind of finalize and wrap up what that process looks like. But I also, on a regular basis, get to interact with our subject matter experts, our astronaut crew. We work on multimedia resources that are filmed with our astronauts on board the International Space Station. And we're looking ahead to what that could look like as through Artemis, we build out habitation on the lunar surface, and eventually with Artemis 3, looking at building our lunar gateway, which will essentially be a space station, but one that orbits the moon instead of the Earth. So we're really making a presence happen in space as we continue to explore. And I get to be on the side that bridges the technical expertise with the education community. And it's just a really cool spot to be. I love showing up every day, and I'm really excited about the work that I get to do.
Yeah, and I think as we hear you talk, again, the leadership topic is curiosity fuels innovation. So we can tell how intelligent you are, but one of the things that you mentioned right off the bat was you get to ask people questions. And I think that's the biggest thing that a lot of us lose is like, it's okay to not be the smartest person in the room, right? Like if you're the smartest person in the room, there's something wrong with that, right? Admit when you don't know something. So I was reading a little bit about it, and you could tell me if these numbers are wrong, but essentially with landing these seedlings on the moon, you're going to share the experience with approximately 2,000 classrooms around the country. Is that correct?
Yeah, initially we'll be distributing around 400 seedlings, and then we've been engaging a couple thousand schools in different activities tied to, research that's happening on the seeds. But we're working on some activities that might allow us to reach more physical locations than that. We have a partnership with the USDA Forest Service, and they're kind of our experts to assess this for those seeds that we flew. Are they viable? Are they strong enough to be able to be replanted? So there's a lot of logistical pieces that will affect the final count on that. But overall, on the digital space, we've engaged probably through series of like distance learning activities and just getting students and educators excited, probably around 20,000 or so classrooms and educators.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So that's one of the coolest things about NASA and why I wanted to talk to you, because part of your job is to do outreach to get into the classroom. So for those of you who don't know, and we'll get into it in a little bit, so a majority of your career was spent in the classroom and you had a passion for teaching. And you just kind of decided to pursue this next step in your career. So tell us a little bit about your role and how it still gives you the fulfillment to bring the students in the classroom with you on this crazy mission. Yeah,
I think it might help to know where I started. So I originally got my degree in physics. I thought that I was going to pursue, a graduate degree program. I was working on materials research and like a windowless lab, but I started to find opportunities to get involved in outreach and kind of the service part of communicating about the science. And that led to my pursuit of education through Teach for America. But I thought that I was going to be in the classroom for a very short period of time and then go back to the world of research, except kind of to your point about asking questions. I was learning so much from my students that I fell in love with the classroom. I fell in love with connecting with young people and, hearing the questions that they had and sometimes learning right there with them. And I think that has been one of my strengths as a growing leader, is knowing that I don't know everything, that I'm not an expert in everything. When I was, I taught in the Philadelphia public school district, and then eventually I got to reconnect with the Coal region and teach at Our Lady of Lourdes. But during that period that I was at Lourdes, I had the opportunity to work with NASA researchers on a program in Greenland. And it was like this first experience where I really saw the application of some of the physics concepts that I was teaching every day, and this world of scientific application where these researchers were trying to understand how our planet is changing over time. And during the experience, I got to be in touch. I was flying science missions over glaciers and the North Pole, and while I was in flight, I got to talk to my students back at home, and just like that feeling of getting students excited and kind of our shared energy around, this is so cool. People actually do this every day as a job. I like, that was kind of the turning point where I was like, oh, wouldn't it be amazing if I could make this my real job? Like shift out of classroom only and also continue to make connections with students. And somehow, I truly do not understand how it happened, but the pieces fell into place, and that's what I do. And I think, we had students, so I'm based at one of NASA's 10 field centers. I'm located in southern Mississippi, about an hour north of New Orleans, at Stennis Space Center. What they do for NASA is test rocket engines, everything from the Apollo era shuttles to getting ready for all the future Artemis missions. We test the engines on site. We got to bring a couple classrooms of students in career and technical education programs to center last week, and they got to touch one of the engines that is going to power Artemis 4, which is going to be a critical part of us building that lunar gateway that I mentioned. And just like seeing and seeing the looks on students' faces, hearing their questions, which again, like being in a room, like they're thinking of questions that I hadn't even crossed my mind. And I think just the opportunity to continue to work with young people through activities like that, or I work with our internship program a lot, it just makes me feel hopeful for the future, and really proud that, as a federal agency, there's such an investment in creating opportunities for students all over the country. And, I hope, our students from home, who are still sitting in those classrooms at Shamokin, at Lourdes, and Mount Carmel Southern are looking to these opportunities and really thinking big, because there's a lot on the horizon that students can get involved in.
And that's the best part about this, right? Is thinking big. And you're a super curious person. So like the thing that I take from that is you have been able to scale your passion from maybe one classroom of 15 students to now still connecting with students, but on a mass level, right? So, I mean, that's just fabulous. So anybody out there who's looking for that fulfillment, or anybody out there who's like, oh, I live in the coal region and I'm not sure what my limits are. Don't put a limit on yourself, right? Kelly McCarthy was working for NASA in Coal Township, Pennsylvania virtually, right, Kelly?
I was, yes. Yeah, and thank you for bringing that up. I got hired during the pandemic at my dream job at NASA, and we were all completely remote in our office. So I got to sit in my home office in Coal Run, Pennsylvania, be near family, be, near my roots, our roots, and also be working on these really cool projects across the agency. And, NASA is one of the many in this, across the space and science enterprise that offers this hybrid workforce, these global opportunities to connect in a lot of different ways. Everything doesn't have to be done on site at a physical location, and there are flexible ways to engage. Even our internship program now has more virtual and hybrid opportunities than it had in the past. So students starting at the age of 16 can get involved with really cool projects and stay where they are, close to family. And I think that's really, really important.
I totally agree with you. And I think you're a great inspiration for all of those students in the classroom. And I think virtually connecting them to these experiences could change their life and change, what they believe is possible. So thank you for doing that. It's a really important mission, no pun intended.
Yeah.
So listen, you mentioned a little bit about it. Can you tell us about NASA's Operation Icebridge and your PolarTREC teacher experience? I mean, I listened to your TEDx talk last evening, and I was just kind of blown away with the way you described, how you were reaching parts of the earth that nobody had even really explored before. So tell us a little bit about that experience, please.
Sure. Yes. That I would say is probably one of the most transformational experiences of my career. And I'll say up front, I know we talked a little bit about this previously. So when I was an educator, because I wasn't sure if I was going to be a classroom educator forever, like I had a lot of thoughts about what I wanted my path to look like. And when I look back now, it feels like it makes sense, but really it was kind of disjointed along the way. But I tried to take advantage of these research opportunities that were out there for educators. So I would peruse all the resources I knew about, submit 1 million applications, get rejected by 95% of them. And the PolarTREC opportunity, it reminded me of an activity that I learned about when I was in college in my physics degree, about some research happening in Antarctica. That is how I eventually found the program that I worked with. I applied a couple of times, made it to the interview round before I actually made it there. But once I got connected with my matched team, so this program was a jointly funded effort for educators by NASA, the National Science Foundation, and NOAA to provide opportunities in polar science to bring awareness to students about career opportunities, and also bring out a level of awareness of the research and science findings that are coming out of studies going on in the polar regions. So the project, as you mentioned, the project I got connected with was NASA's Operation Icebridge. It was a 10-year mission in NASA's airborne science purview. The name came from the fact that it was intended to be set up to collect data to bridge a potential gap between two satellites that were collecting polar ice data for us. So ISAT-1 was decommissioned in around 2009, and ISAT-2 launched in 2019, I believe. But you had this period of time in between where they were using airborne science as a way to continue to capture data. So I got integrated into this science team as an educator-researcher. By way of Baltimore and then New York and then eventually Denmark, I finally made it to one of the northernmost parts of Greenland, where I met the team that I would be working with for a month. And I flew my first science mission with that team in late April of 2016. And it was a flight called the North Pole Transect. We were trying to collect data on Earth's changing ice sheets. And so we were mapping the Arctic Ocean. That meant that we would fly out over the ocean and drop down to about 1,500 feet above the surface. So we were super, super close. And we were seeing at that moment of time a snapshot of Earth that no one even if someone followed in our tracks on flight, the ice is always moving. No one was ever going to see exactly what we saw in that moment ever again. And I think that totally just like gave me that feeling of how small we are on this earth, and how important it is for us to try our best to understand it, and, you know, work with that as it's continuing to change. And on that flight, it was about 9 hours. That was, I referenced that in one of the earlier questions that you asked. We were talking to my students. They had this cool platform that allowed us to like text chat with my students. And I remember that they were like hanging, like I left them hanging completely. And one of the scientists was like, I'm getting back to your students. I just told them you're totally enamored and
That's
cannot
amazing.
be like taken away from the window, because it was so beautiful.
Yeah.
And that was like a month of that. And just kind of learning about the work that they were doing, being part of the science missions, and also getting that bird's eye view of this crazy, amazing, beautiful, pristine part of the planet that no human has ever set foot on or touched. I also got to fly the plane that day. That was kind of one of those like amazing experiences. The pilot said they needed to give the physics teacher some street cred, which they did.
I mean, what an amazing experience, right? I mean, that's exactly what we're talking about on this podcast. And again, this podcast is about using adversity as motivation. And one of the things that I think we're learning from you is you got rejected a million times.
Oh, yeah.
And you didn't give up, right? You just kept saying, I'm going to apply again. I'm going to apply again. I'm going to apply again. So can you tell folks listening, I mean, that's been the story, not just on that PolarTREC experience, but also even with your transition to NASA, correct? Like, how many times did you actually apply and get rejected before you were able to get the job you wanted?
Right. And so I actually tried to go back and look at my rejection letters. To count them. There's a lot of them. I think, you know, after I had that experience in Greenland and that recognition that like, oh, okay, this might be a path that I want to focus on, I created a profile on USA Jobs, and just at any time I saw something come up from NASA Science or something tangential, I was submitting applications. And I think sometimes this is advice for folks. Sometimes it can feel like your applications go into an ether. But I will say, with every rejection, initially it feels a little bit tough, but the job I had now, if I didn't have the other positions I held between the time I left the classroom and where I am now, I would not have the skills to lead the work that I'm leading right now, to work with the teams that I'm working on, to understand how our organization operates. If I didn't have the milestones in between that I veered toward when the thing I thought I wanted didn't work out, I wouldn't be as successful and I think confident in the work that I'm doing right now.
Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah.
No, I love that answer. And that takes me on to my next question, which is, you were recently selected to participate in the NASA First Reimagined Leadership class as a part of a cohort of 60 NASA civil servants engaged in an 8-month training period. We talk about leadership on this podcast. You just mentioned that you wouldn't have been prepared. And I think that's important for people to understand. You know, I always thought I wanted to be an entrepreneur, but I realized I didn't go into business for myself until I was 33. And had I done it earlier, I don't know that I would have been as successful, right? Same thing with you. You've already admitted that. So tell us about this leadership class and kind of some of the leadership things you're going to learn in this cohort.
Yeah. And I actually, so that leadership cohort took place in 2022. So I'm now in the process of being able to implement some of the things that we conquered. But I will say this. You asked what it's like to work at NASA. I think outside of the amazing, innovative work that we get to do, there's also a lot of development opportunities. It's very clear that there's effort and investment in trying to make people better. And you know, I've heard this proverb, iron sharpens iron. And I think there's like a level of support, but there's also a level of like having like a group of peers that can challenge you every day. And that's really what that leadership program was. There were 60 of us. put together from all across the agency. And I mentioned I'm at a field center in Mississippi. There's 10 field centers spread across the country, and there's also a pretty hefty remote workforce. So we, represented almost the whole of the United States and every different field. I represented education, but I was working in this leadership group alongside folks who are working directly on the hardware that's flying on Artemis 1, or who are working on developing our talent through human resources, or working on computer programming to keep the space station in low Earth orbit. So just the first part or the first benefit of that leadership program was being put in a room and tasked with a couple of challenges alongside people who are outside of your field. And then we were specifically charged with thinking about the future of the agency in the future of work. We were emerging from the pandemic, and charged with kind of building solutions. And one of the key pieces that I connected with and worked with was our efforts around talent development and mentorship, and the power of mentorship. And I think that's something that a lot of us are continuing to focus on. And I know that my whole career prior to NASA and now has relied on mentors and asking those questions, getting advice. And sometimes I get to be the mentor, sometimes I get to be the mentee. And those relationships work both ways. And I think that was a huge benefit of that program. And it was tough. It was definitely a tough program on top of our full-time work. But it really allowed us to, I think, grow and challenge ourselves. And now we have this cohort of peers that we can bounce things off of and continue to grow, as we move forward and stretch our careers. For me, I found the dream position, but like, what is next? Like, I think I'm constantly asking that question too.
Yeah, and it's funny, I think I mentioned in one of my previous podcasts, one of my biggest mentors was actually somebody that was 5 years younger than me. And had I been so closed-minded, and had I not been willing to learn from him, it would have been one of the biggest mistakes of my life. So like, the mentor-mentee thing is real. Biggest organizations in the world, most successful organizations in the world are doing it successfully, but it comes back to having that open mind.
For sure.
And, you're working on amazing things at NASA. I mean, some of this stuff, it's almost hard to wrap our brains around, but, the Artemis missions, and if anybody wants to check them out, I mean, Kelly's already spoken to them. I mean, she's literally sending seedlings to the moon, getting, they have the mission to Mars, et cetera. It's really, really fascinating science. And you can learn about it if you're interested in looking that up. But I want to transition now away from your current work. And I want to go to you as an individual. Okay. So what is it inside of you that makes you so curious? Curiosity to me is one of the most important traits we can have as humans. We can be curious about other people. We can be curious about the world. We can be curious about, what's next, right? What is it inside of you that makes you so curious about the world?
That's such a good question. And I think back, I actually, in preparation for this conversation, I was thinking about one of my teachers when I was in high school at Lourdes. Folks will know him if they went to Lourdes, but Mr. Welker had a reputation for being tough, but he also encouraged you to persist through problem sets. And I think the practice that I did in that classroom, like, I will say physics, calculus, those are subjects that can feel like a wall initially. But if you continue to put in the work, pages and pages and pages and pages into a problem, and finally get an answer, that satisfaction, that reward of like, oh, everything's not a mystery. Like, we're kind of, I guess, like thinking about the relationship between math and physics to just like the human experience, like we can figure things out together and you're not going to know the answer right away. Like I think that was like a turning point for me to recognize, like, I'm not supposed to know it just like off the top of my head. We can figure things out. And I think that reward and that continuous pursuit of that reward, whether it's in my work or a problem I'm solving or figuring out how to interact with people, I think that for me is kind of the driving motivation behind my curiosity.
And that's a great answer. And honestly, that's another teacher who had such a massive impact on your life, and now you're paying it forward, which is our responsibility, right? That's our responsibility.
Yes.
As leaders. And here's what's your message to students all over the world, right? I mean, we're talking about NASA, but especially, Chad and I mentioned on every podcast that we have a pride for the coal region. You're from the coal region. You own the coal region. What is your message to those kids sitting in the coal region right now who maybe might be questioning some of their limitations or what they can accomplish? What's your message to those students?
I think my message is that if you're worried about a limitation, push yourself to fail through it. And then you're going to break down whatever barrier that was. And if it's geographic, if you're worried about location, like make contacts with folks. I think there's, a lot of, like you said, opportunity for mentors, whether they're older or younger. I know I've been able to interact with several people. I grew up in the coal region. I'm here in southern Mississippi. I have learned that I work with someone from Pottsville, and I report to someone from Pine Grove. Like there's just all of these connections to home that you might not even realize. But one of my mentors, as I was leading into my current work, he manages space station operations at headquarters, and I got to work with his mom when I was a teacher, and I just think recognizing that you are not limited by where you're growing up, by the resources that you have. And I will say that educators at Lourdes and Shamokin and Southern Mount Carmel, they are amazing, and I know that they're working to provide access to resources and tools. So I would just say reach out, ask questions, and don't be afraid to fail through any perceived limitations, because you got it. You can do whatever you want.
I love that. And again, I'm moving it to you personally. So you're an Albert Einstein Distinguished Educator by the National Science Foundation. Tell us what that means to you.
So that was an honor that I was able to take on a few years ago. So it was really one of those chapters in my transition period out of the formal classroom. But through that fellowship, I got to work in the National Science Foundation's Geosciences Directorate. So I got to continue to stay connected to that climate science, Earth observation world that I found in Greenland. But I worked with our education and diversity portfolio. So that helped me learn. I was coming in with an honored Distinguished Educator Award, but again, I came into a position where I was definitely not the expert. And I learned so much about how federal grant opportunities work, how educators and schools can access federal resources. That was a space as a classroom teacher I didn't have knowledge of. And I think that opportunity in that program allowed me to learn a lot that I can now apply when I'm working with museums, libraries, and schools around the country. And it also provided me an opportunity to access mentors and peers who I still stay in touch with as I continue my own work. So that in itself, it was an honor, but more so a learning experience and a great growth opportunity for me. It also took me, I had a little stint before Mississippi and DC that took me to Washington, DC to also get to know some more of the federal landscape and how things run, which is really important.
That's amazing. And first of all, I just want to reiterate how proud of you I am.
Back at you, cousin.
And as we wrap this episode up, right, as we wrap up, this interview, what can science teachers or teachers in general do to be a part of some of the things that are happening at NASA? Is there a website that they need to go on? Like, how do they get involved?
Yeah, honestly, the easiest way is going to be stem.nasa.gov. You can always reach out to me too, and I can get you, we're a small but mighty agency-wide organization. So if you want to reach out to me, I can leave an email address too. I don't know if that
Sure. Go ahead.
is helpful. Okay. So kelly.mccarthy@nasa.gov should be hopefully easy. But yeah, reach out to me and I'd be happy to share some of our resources. We do have a digital community of practice called NASA Connects, and I can share some information by email on how to get involved with that as well.
Well, Kelly, thanks again for joining us. I think there's so much to learn from your curiosity, right? From your experiences. I can't wait to share your story with our listeners. And yeah, really, really proud of you, kid.
I'm proud of you too. Thank you so much for having me, and thanks for what you guys are doing to provide access to stories and just amplify the work that people are doing around the coal region.
Yeah. So what an amazing conversation with Kelly McCarthy, Chad. What are your thoughts?
She's the best. She is super humble.
She really is super humble.
You can take the girl out of the coal region, but you can't take the coal region out of the girl.
That is absolutely true. And how cool is it when she talks about working from NASA out of, Coal Run, Pennsylvania?
Yeah, it's fantastic.
Yeah. I mean, that's the story we want to tell, right? As you know, we have a passion for the coal region. We're trying to, really fuel some momentum in the coal region. And to all of the students and folks listening, I mean, she literally was working for years for NASA in Coal Run, PA. She's the story of, listen, go accomplish your goals. Don't let anything hold you back, Chad.
That's true. Yep.
Do you know how to send moon trees?
Yeah. There's a YouTube video on it. I just kind of refreshed myself on it. No, I don't. I don't know how to send trees to the moon or lead the Artemis expedition.
Okay. Well,
I'm not qualified for that stuff.
Either am I. But again, we try to take lessons from Kelly. And one of the biggest things that I learned from Kelly was her stories on mentorship, and how NASA operates with mentors and mentees. And, they're exploring things that nobody has the answers to. And I think we can really, really use that as a learning point on our podcast, to really improve what we're doing. And I think we really need to encourage curiosity.
I agree. Does she ever come back to the area?
All the time.
All the time?
She's always back. She loves family and being a part of the coal region, if you couldn't tell.
That's fantastic. I love all about it.
Yeah. So listen, to wrap up this episode, again, I'm so proud of her, but I want to just talk about a few steps that I've come up with again through my research of, how to stay curious. And how to improve your curiosity, I should say. You're going to have to edit that out.
I don't have to edit anything. Okay. We might just keep that in there. It might surprise you.
Okay. So listen, number one is be passionate.
Right.
Okay. Because when you ask a question and you're passionate about it, people can feel that and they can't wait to share your knowledge with them. Number two is ask terrific questions. My mom always said to me that, like, if you don't ask the question, you're never going to know it. And somebody else in here is thinking the same thing. Like, don't be afraid to ask questions.
There really is no such thing as a stupid question.
There really isn't, right? Be teachable and teach others.
Be a sponge.
Exactly. Like if you have knowledge to share, people are going to reciprocate and they can't wait to share it with you. And Kelly mentions this, get uncomfortable. They let her pilot, while she was on that PolarTREC plan. And she literally got to that point where she left her students hanging, but they're sitting there thinking, my teacher's literally driving the plane. I mean, it's insane.
Yeah.
So, and listen, we really need to focus on reading. I know that I know I'm going to sound like the old guy, right? But there's so much happening in the world and so much technology being thrown at us at all times, right? We need to be lifelong learners, and there's nothing like just getting out a book, turning off technology, and just reading about something that you want to learn about, and then share that knowledge with other people. And then as an organization, we need to allow time for people to be curious. If you book every minute of your team's day, they don't have any time to be curious and creative. And Chad, I know this matters to you, but we have a team of designers on our team, right? I can't manage them the same way we manage other employees. It's impossible to be creative from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m.
Yes, it is.
And I am aware of that. So as a leader, I have to be like, I need to let them go. Their creativity might happen at 9:58 a.m. or it might happen at 1:30 p.m. But if I sit here at 8 a.m. and say, you need to be creative right now for 15 minutes, they're not going to be their best.
No, it's true. My time that I'm most creative is 10 to 2. It's after 2 o'clock where I'm just like, nope, I can't do it. If I'm working on a video, a project of some sort, like after 2 o'clock, I'm just doing it to get it done.
Yeah, and
so
you're aware of
you're
that.
kind of being, forced to do that. But in my realm of creativity, it's about 10 to 2 where I'm actually like really engaged into the project.
Yeah, and that's fabulous. So listen, guys, Kelly McCarthy was an awesome guest. I think she has so much to offer. Again, we just recapped kind of the mentee, mentor. She's doing amazing things in the world, really trying to figure out planet Earth and sending, seeds to the moon and stuff that most of us can't even really comprehend, all while trying to educate others, which is a big thing I think we need to take from Kelly. Is it was as much about her teaching her students and getting other people involved as it was just about her. So that's the lesson we can take, guys, and I can't wait to get started on the next one.
Are you a business owner, a leader, or an aspiring achiever looking to turn life's challenges into powerful fuel for your success? You've come to the right place. Get ready to unlock the secrets to turning life's hardships into your most powerful ally. Your hosts, along with our incredible guests, will help you tap into your own Lauer power and guide you towards the success you've always dreamed of.